The dusty streets of Tucson buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Merchants hawked their wares. Horses clip-clopped past wooden storefronts. And the desert sun already promised another scorching day. But nobody paid attention to the small figure huddled near the general store's entrance. She was maybe 12 years old, with long black hair that caught the sunlight and dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets older than her years. Her clothes were patched and worn, a simple brown dress that had seen better days. Most folks who passed by either looked right through her or deliberately turned their heads away. $2, she whispered to anyone who would listen. Holding up a small, woven basket filled with colorful beads and carved wooden trinkets. Apache work. Good quality. The townspeople hurried past. Some wrinkled their noses in disgust. Others muttered under their breath about those people and how they didn't belong in civilized society. A few tossed coins into her basket without even looking at the beautiful craftsmanship inside. Her name was Ayanna, which meant eternal blossom in her native tongue, though no one in town bothered to ask. To them, she was just another nameless Apache trying to survive in a world that didn't want her. The Apache Wars had ended years ago, but the wounds they left behind still festered. White settlers viewed any Apache with suspicion and fear. The reservation was miles away, and those who lived outside its boundaries faced constant harassment. Ayanna's family had been among the unlucky ones, caught between two worlds and welcome in neither. Her father had died fighting alongside Geronimo in the final campaigns. Her mother succumbed to illness the previous winter, unable to get proper medical care because no doctor in town would treat an Apache woman. Now Ayanna lived alone in a small shack on the outskirts of town, surviving on whatever meager coins she could earn, selling her handicrafts. Each morning, she would wake before dawn to gather materials from the desert: smooth stones for painting, sturdy twigs for weaving, bits of metal that caught the light just right. She had learned the traditional arts from her grandmother, who had passed down generations of knowledge through patient hands and whispered stories. The work was intricate and time-consuming. A single bracelet might take her 3 days to complete, threading tiny beads in patterns that told stories of her people's history. The wooden figures she carved represented ancient spirits and animals sacred to Apache culture. Each piece held meaning, carried prayers, and reflected skills honed over centuries. But the white townspeople saw none of this artistry. To them, her creations were just Indian trinkets, curiosities at best, worthless junk at worst. They had no idea that the geometric patterns in her beadwork mapped out constellations that guided travelers across the desert, or that her carved eagles carried the hopes of warriors who would never return home. Ayanna had learned to make herself invisible. She spoke softly, moved carefully, and never met anyone's eyes for too long. Trouble came to those who stood out, who reminded the settlers too much of the conflicts they preferred to forget. Better to be overlooked than to become a target. The general store owner, Mr. Henderson, tolerated her presence because she never caused problems, and occasionally a tourist would buy something from her basket, but his tolerance had limits. More than once, he had threatened to call the sheriff if she scared away paying customers with her presence. Sheriff Morrison was a harsh man who believed the only good Apache was one safely contained on the reservation. He had made it clear that Ayanna existed in town at his sufferance, and that sufferance could be withdrawn at any time. One complaint, one perceived slight, and she would find herself forced to leave everything she had managed to build. The other Apache families who had once lived in the area had gradually disappeared. Some moved to the reservation, others headed further south toward Mexico, and a few simply vanished one night, perhaps sensing that the wind was changing and bringing fresh troubles. Ayanna remained because she had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. She had tried working as a domestic servant for some of the wealthier families, but the women of the house invariably decided they didn't trust an Apache around their children and precious belongings. The men sometimes offered her work, but their intentions were rarely honorable, and Ayanna had learned to recognize danger in a man's eyes long before he spoke his intentions aloud. So she returned each day to her spot near the general store, laying out her wares with quiet dignity and hoping that today might be different, that someone might see past her heritage to recognize the skill and artistry she offered, that someone might treat her as a human being rather than an unwelcome reminder of uncomfortable history. The morning crowd thinned as people went about their business. Ayanna counted the few coins in her basket. Not enough for a proper meal. Certainly not enough for the winter supplies she would need in a few months. Her stomach growled quietly, reminding her that she had eaten nothing since yesterday's meager portion of cornmeal and wild berries. A group of children ran past, laughing and chasing a rolling hoop. One boy, perhaps 7 years old, stumbled and fell near her basket. Ayanna reached out instinctively to help him up, her hand gentle on his small shoulder. "Don't touch me, you dirty Indian!" the boy shrieked, scrambling away as if burned. His mother appeared instantly, sweeping him into her arms and glaring at Ayanna with unconcealed hatred. "How dare you put your hands on my child?" the woman snarled. Sheriff Morrison." Ayanna's heart sank. She began quickly packing her things, knowing what would come next. But before she could escape, the sheriff's heavy boots were approaching, and a familiar cold voice cut through the morning air. "Problem here, Mrs. Patterson? That savage tried to grab my boy. I want her arrested." Sheriff Morrison's pale eyes fixed on Ayanna with the intensity of a hunting hawk. She kept her gaze down, hands trembling slightly as she continued folding her wares into their cloth wrapping. "Is that so?" Morrison's hand rested casually on his gun belt. "You causing trouble again, girl?" "No, sir," Ayanna whispered. Boy fell down. "I only tried to help." "Help?" Mrs. Patterson's voice rose to a near shriek. "Animals like you don't help decent people. You steal from them." A crowd was gathering now, drawn by the commotion. Ayanna felt their eyes on her like physical weights, pressing her down into the dust. Some faces showed curiosity, others disgust, but none showed sympathy. She was alone in a sea of hostility, with nowhere to run and no one to defend her. "I think it's time you moved along," Sheriff Morrison said, his tone deceptively mild. "Far along. Maybe it's time you found yourself a nice spot on the reservation where you belong." Ayanna's throat tightened. The reservation meant giving up what little independence she had managed to maintain. It meant being just another mouth to feed in an already overcrowded system. Another broken spirit in a place where hope went to die. But what choice did she have? "I understand, sir," she managed to say, her voice barely audible. "Good. I'll give you until tomorrow morning to get your affairs in order. After that, I don't want to see your face in this town again." The crowd began to disperse, apparently satisfied that justice had been served. Ayanna gathered the last of her belongings and stood slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. Everything she had worked for, every small victory she had achieved in carving out a place for herself, was crumbling like sand in her fingers. As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with a tall figure who had been standing at the edge of the crowd. She looked up quickly, preparing for another confrontation, but found herself staring into a pair of surprisingly kind blue eyes set in a weathered, sun-beaten face. The man was clearly a cowboy. His clothes were practical and well-worn, his hands calloused from years of rope work, and his hat had the distinctive shape of someone who spent more time under open sky than under any roof. But there was something different about the way he looked at her. Something that made her pause instead of immediately looking away. "Excuse me, miss," he said quietly, tipping his hat with genuine courtesy. "I couldn't help but notice your work there. That's some fine craftsmanship." Ayanna blinked in surprise. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with basic respect that she almost didn't know how to respond. "Thank you, sir," she said carefully, still ready to flee if necessary. The cowboy studied her basket for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "How much for the whole lot?" "Oh, sir, everything in that basket. What would you take for all of it?" Ayanna's mind raced. She had maybe $20 worth of goods, if she could find the right buyers, and if those buyers were in generous moods. But this man seemed serious, and she desperately needed whatever money she could get. $20, sir," she said, then quickly added, "but I could take less if $20 it is." The cowboy counted out the bills without hesitation and held them out to her. "That seems more than fair for work of this quality." Ayanna stared at the money in amazement. $20 would buy her food for weeks, maybe even passage to somewhere safer. She took the bills with trembling fingers, hardly daring to believe this was real. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much." The cowboy was examining one of her carved eagles, turning it over in his large hands with surprising gentleness. "What does this represent, if you don't mind me asking?" For the first time in months, Ayanna felt a spark of something other than fear or resignation. Someone was actually interested in her culture, in the meaning behind her work. "It's a spirit guide," she explained, her voice growing stronger. "Eagles carry prayers to the Creator. This one is carved to bring protection to travelers." "Protection for travelers," the cowboy repeated thoughtfully. "I reckon I could use some of that." He looked up at her again, and something in his expression had shifted. "What's your name?" "Miss?" "Ayanna, sir. Ayanna." "That's a pretty name. Mine's Thomas Hartwell, but most folks call me Tom." He paused, seeming to wrestle with some internal decision. "Ayanna, I couldn't help but overhear that conversation with the sheriff just now." Ayanna's momentary happiness faded. Of course he had heard. Everyone had heard. Now he would probably want his money back, would regret his kindness once he realized what kind of trouble she represented. "I'm sorry you had to witness that, sir," she said quietly. "I'll be leaving town tomorrow." As the sheriff ordered, "Where will you go?" The simple question hit her like a physical blow. Where would she go? The reservation was overcrowded and offered little hope for someone with her skills. Other towns would be no more welcoming than this one. The desert was vast and unforgiving, especially for a young woman traveling alone. "I don't know, sir," she admitted. Tom Hartwell was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful. When he finally spoke, his words changed everything. "I've got a ranch about 30 miles south of here. Nothing fancy, but it's honest work and decent living. I could use someone with skills like yours, someone who knows how to make useful things, who understands how to live with the land instead of fighting it." He paused, watching her carefully. "Would you be interested in a job, Ayanna?" Ayanna stared at Tom Hartwell as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "A job? A real job? Offered with respect and kindness?" She had dreamed of such a possibility but never dared believe it might actually happen. "You mean that, sir?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't say things I don't mean," Tom replied gently. "It's hard work, mind you. Ranch life isn't easy for anyone. But you'd have a roof over your head, regular meals, and honest pay for honest work." Around them, the normal bustle of the town continued. But Ayanna felt as if time had stopped. This moment felt too precious, too fragile to be real. Men like Sheriff Morrison spent their days making life difficult for people like her, while here was a complete stranger offering her salvation without asking for anything in return. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help me?" Tom adjusted his hat, looking slightly uncomfortable with the direct question. "I reckon everyone deserves a fair chance. Besides, I've been managing that ranch alone for too long. Could use someone with practical skills and good sense." He didn't mention that he had spent the last 5 minutes watching the crowd's treatment of her with growing disgust. Tom Hartwell had fought in the Apache Wars himself, had seen terrible things done by both sides, but he had also learned that hatred was a luxury he couldn't afford. Out on the frontier, survival often depended on recognizing ability and character, regardless of where it came from. Ayanna's mind raced through possibilities and dangers. Accepting his offer would mean leaving everything familiar, trusting her safety to a man she didn't know, but staying meant facing Sheriff Morrison's deadline with nowhere to go and no prospects for survival. "What kind of work would I be doing, Mr. Hartwell?" "Call me Tom." "And it would be whatever needs doing, I suppose. Cooking, mending, maybe helping with the animals. I noticed you've got steady hands and an eye for detail. Those are useful qualities on a working ranch." He paused thoughtfully. "Plus, I've been thinking about expanding into trading. Someone who can make quality goods like yours could help establish relationships with the Apache settlements to the south." The last statement surprised Ayanna. Most white ranchers avoided any contact with Apache communities, viewing them as nothing but potential trouble. But Tom seemed to see economic opportunity where others saw only threat. "You would trade with my people?" Business is business, Tom said pragmatically. The Apache know this land better than anyone. They've got skills and knowledge that could be valuable to the right person. Seems foolish to ignore that just because of old grudges. Sheriff Morrison appeared again, having noticed that the troublesome Indian was still in town and apparently engaged in conversation with a respectable citizen. His face darkened as he approached. "Problem here, mister?" Morrison's hand rested on his gun belt in what he probably thought was a casual gesture. Tom straightened to his full height, which was considerable. Though he dressed like a simple cowboy, there was something in his bearing that suggested he was not a man to be trifled with. "No problem, Sheriff. Just concluding some business." "Business?" Morrison's eyes narrowed. "With her? Is there some law against commerce in this town?" Tom's voice remained level, but there was an edge to it that made the sheriff reassess the situation. "Well, no." "Then I reckon we're all set." Tom turned back to Ayanna. "Miss Ayanna, if you're interested in that position we discussed, I'll be leaving town around noon. Meet me at the livery stable if you've made up your mind." Morrison watched this exchange with growing irritation. "Now wait just a minute. That girl has been ordered to leave town by tomorrow morning. She's not conducting any business here." Tom fixed the sheriff with a steady gaze. "And she'll be leaving, won't she?" "Problem solved." Tom fixed the sheriff. A problem solved. There was something in the cowboy's quiet confidence that made Morrison reluctant to push the confrontation further. Tom Hartwell might dress like any other ranch hand, but he carried himself like someone who had faced down more dangerous opponents than a small-town sheriff. "Just see that she does," Morrison muttered, then stalked away. Tom watched the sheriff depart, then turned back to Ayanna. "Like I said, noon at the livery stable. Take your time deciding, but don't take too long." He tipped his hat politely and walked away, leaving Ayanna standing alone with $20 in her hand and the first real hope she had felt in months. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Ayanna gathered her few belongings from the shack where she lived, packing everything she owned into a single, small bundle. There wasn't much. Some clothes, her tools for crafting, a few mementos from her family, and a worn photograph of her parents, taken shortly before her father left for his final campaign. As she prepared to leave the only home she had known since her mother's death, Ayanna reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. This morning she had been facing exile to the reservation with no prospects and no hope. Now she was preparing to start a new life with a man who seemed genuinely interested in her skills and abilities. But doubts nagged at her. What if Tom Hartwell's kindness was just a facade? What if he had ulterior motives she couldn't see? Stories circulated among Apache women about white men who offered help only to extract a different kind of payment later. Could she trust her instincts about this cowboy she had just met? On the other hand, what choice did she have? The reservation offered only slow starvation, and the gradual death of everything that made her who she was. At least with Tom's offer, she would have a chance to use her skills and maintain some independence. She arrived at the livery stable just before noon, her bundle slung across her shoulder and her heart hammering with nervous anticipation. Tom was there waiting, standing beside a sturdy wagon loaded with supplies. His horse, a patient-looking mare with intelligent eyes, was already hitched and ready for the journey. "You came," he said, and Ayanna detected genuine relief in his voice. "I wasn't sure you would." "I said I would think about it, Mr. Tom." "I have decided, yes." "Good." He helped her load her belongings into the wagon, then offered his hand to assist her up to the seat beside him. "It's about a 6-hour ride to the ranch. We'll have plenty of time to talk about what you can expect." As they rolled out of Tucson, Ayanna felt a mixture of fear and excitement unlike anything she had experienced before. Behind them lay everything familiar, everything safe in its own limited way. Ahead lay the unknown, with all its possibilities and dangers. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled south. The desert here was different from the area around town. More rugged, more alive somehow. Tom pointed out landmarks and natural features explaining the lay of the land with the easy knowledge of someone who had spent years learning to read the subtle signs that spelled the difference between life and death in the wilderness. "That ridge there marks the northern boundary of my land," he said, indicating a line of rocky outcroppings in the distance. "The ranch sits in a valley about 3 miles beyond it. There's a natural spring that feeds a stream year-round, which is why I settled there in the first place." "How long have you owned the ranch?" Ayanna asked. "About 8 years now. Bought it from a family that decided ranch life wasn't for them after their first harsh winter." Tom chuckled. "Can't say I blame them. It takes a certain kind of person to thrive out here." "What kind of person?" Tom considered the question seriously. "Someone who can adapt. Someone who sees opportunity instead of just obstacles. Someone who understands that survival sometimes means working with the land instead of trying to conquer it." Ayanna nodded thoughtfully. These were concepts she understood intimately. Apache culture was built around adaptation and harmony with the natural world, but she had never heard a white man express such ideas before. "You sound like you have respect for Apache ways," she observed carefully. "I've learned to respect anything that works," Tom replied. "During the wars, I saw Apache warriors survive in country that would kill most white men in a matter of days. That's not savagery. That's skill and knowledge passed down through generations. A smart man pays attention to such things." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon wheels creating a steady rhythm against the hard-packed earth. The sun was warm on Ayanna's shoulders, and for the first time in months, she felt herself beginning to relax. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Tom?" "Shoot. Why did you really offer me this job?" "Not because you need help. You've been managing alone for 8 years. Why now? And why me?" Tom was quiet for so long that Ayanna wondered if she had overstepped some boundary. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful and a little sad. "I had a daughter once, about your age, maybe a year or two younger." He paused, his hands tightening slightly on the reins. "She died of fever 3 years ago, along with her mother. They're buried on the ranch, under a big cottonwood by the creek." Ayanna felt her heart constrict with sympathy. "I'm sorry. Thank you." Tom cleared his throat and continued. "After they died, I kept thinking about all the things I should have done differently, all the times I could have been kinder, more understanding, more helpful to people who needed it." He glanced at her sideways. "When I saw how those people treated you today, when I heard that sheriff threatening to run you out of town for the crime of trying to make an honest living, well, it reminded me that we all get chances to do better. I figured this might be one of mine." The honesty of his answer touched something deep in Ayanna's chest. She had expected him to say something about needing the help or seeing a business opportunity. She hadn't expected such raw emotional truth. "What was your daughter's name?" she asked softly. "Sarah. Sarah Marie Hartwell." Tom smiled slightly. "She would have liked you, I think. She always had a soft spot for strays and underdogs." The ranch came into view as they crested a small hill in the late afternoon. It was modest but well-maintained, with a solid-looking house, a barn, several outbuildings, and corrals that currently held about 20 horses. The promised stream sparkled in the distance, lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade in the desert landscape. "It's beautiful," Ayanna said, and she meant it. The ranch felt peaceful, settled, like a place where someone could build a real life. "It's home," Tom replied simply. "Or at least, I hope it will be for you too." As they approached the house, Ayanna noticed details that spoke of a man trying to maintain a homestead largely by himself. The vegetable garden was functional, but not thriving. Laundry hung on a line in a somewhat haphazard fashion. Small repairs had been postponed in favor of more urgent tasks. "I should warn you," Tom said as he helped her down from the wagon. "I'm not much of a housekeeper. I can cook basic meals and keep things from falling down, but I'm afraid the finer points of domestic management have been beyond me since Margaret died." Ayanna surveyed the situation with a practical eye. The problems she saw were all solvable with time, effort, and organization. More importantly, they represented opportunities to make herself truly useful. to prove that Tom's faith in her abilities was justified. "I can help with all of this," she said confidently. "My mother taught me to run a household, and Apache women learn to make much from little." Tom nodded approvingly. "I figured as much. Come on, let me show you where you'll be staying." He led her to a small but comfortable room at the back of the house. It had a window that looked out over the stream and the cottonwoods, a simple bed with clean linens, a dresser, and a wash basin. To Ayanna, who had been living in a one-room shack with dirt floors, it looked like luxury. "This was Sarah's room," Tom said quietly. "I've been keeping it ready, thinking maybe someday. Well, anyway, it's yours now if you want it." Ayanna set her bundle on the bed and turned to face him. "Thank you, Mr. Tom, for everything. I promise I'll work hard to earn my place here." "I'm not worried about that," Tom replied. "Anyone who can create beauty in the middle of hardship, who can maintain dignity when the whole world seems set against them, that's someone worth having around." As the sun set over the ranch, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, Ayanna stood at her new window and marveled at the unexpected turns life could take. This morning she had been a nobody, a discarded person with no future and no hope. Tonight she was beginning a new chapter in a place where her skills might be valued and her heritage might be seen as an asset rather than a liability. There would be challenges ahead, she knew. Building trust would take time, and proving herself would require constant effort. But for the first time since her mother's death, Ayanna felt like she had found a place where she might actually belong. 3 months had passed since Ayanna arrived at the Hartwell Ranch, and the transformation was remarkable. What had once been a functional but struggling operation now hummed with efficiency and purpose. The vegetable garden flourished under her careful attention, producing more food than Tom had seen in years. The house itself had been reorganized and cleaned until it gleamed, yet somehow managed to feel more welcoming rather than intimidatingly pristine. Ayanna had thrown herself into ranch life with an energy that surprised even herself. Her days began before dawn, when she would rise to prepare breakfast and tend to the morning chores. She had learned to milk cows, gather eggs, and manage the complex logistics of keeping a working ranch supplied and organized. But more than that, she had begun to understand the rhythms of the land itself. Tom had been right about her instincts. Ayanna's Apache heritage had given her an almost intuitive understanding of weather patterns, animal behavior, and the subtle signs that indicated changes in the natural world. She could predict storms hours before they appeared on the horizon, knew which grasses the horses preferred and when they needed to be moved to fresh pasture, and had an uncanny ability to spot potential problems before they became serious issues. The relationship between them had evolved into something neither had quite expected. What had begun as a simple employer-employee arrangement had gradually become something more like a partnership. Tom had come to rely not just on Ayanna's domestic skills, but on her insights and observations about ranch management. She, in turn, had discovered that Tom's offer of respect and fair treatment had been genuine. More importantly, Ayanna had begun to heal from the years of degradation and dismissal she had endured in town. Her confidence had returned, along with her natural intelligence and creativity. She had resumed her craftwork in the evenings, but now she created pieces for pleasure rather than desperate survival. Tom had set up a small workspace for her in one of the outbuildings, where she could work in peace and quiet. The trading venture Tom had mentioned was beginning to show promise. Word had spread among the Apache communities to the south that there was a white rancher who dealt fairly and respectfully with Indian customers. Small groups had begun arriving periodically, bringing items to trade for supplies or horses. Ayanna served as translator and cultural interpreter, helping both sides navigate the complex negotiations that such exchanges required. "You were right about the trading opportunities," Tom said one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. A group of Apache traders had departed that afternoon, taking 3 horses and leaving behind silver jewelry, well-crafted leather goods, and valuable information about water sources in the southern desert. "My people are not used to being treated with respect by white traders," Ayanna replied. "Word spreads quickly when someone proves they can be trusted." "It's been profitable for everyone involved," Tom agreed. But more than that, it feels right somehow. Like this is how things should work between people. Ayanna nodded, understanding what he meant. The ranch had become a place where old boundaries seemed less important than practical cooperation. It was a small oasis of possibility in a world still largely divided by suspicion and misunderstanding. But their peaceful existence was not destined to last undisturbed. The trouble began when Sheriff Morrison arrived unexpectedly one hot afternoon in late summer. Ayanna saw him coming long before he reached the house, his dust cloud visible for miles across the desert. Her stomach clenched with familiar anxiety, but she forced herself to remain calm as she went to find Tom. "Sheriff's coming," she said simply. Tom looked up from the harness he was repairing, his expression growing serious. "Any idea what he wants?" "Nothing good, I expect." They watched Morrison's approach in tense silence. When he finally reined in his horse near the porch, his face was flushed with heat and ill-concealed irritation. "Hartwell," he said by way of greeting, deliberately ignoring Ayanna's presence. "Sheriff Morrison, what brings you all the way out here?" Morrison dismounted and accepted Tom's offer of water, drinking deeply before answering. "Been hearing some interesting stories about your operation here. Folks in town are saying you're harboring fugitives and trading with hostile Indians. Is that what folks are saying?" Tom's voice remained carefully neutral. "That's exactly what they're saying, and I'm here to investigate those claims." Ayanna felt her hard-won security beginning to crumble. She had known this day might come, but she had hoped for more time to prove herself indispensable. Now it seemed that the outside world had finally noticed their arrangement and decided to interfere. "I'm not harboring anyone," Tom said firmly. "Miss Ayanna is my employee. She works for wages and earns her keep. Same as any hired hand." "Employee?" Morrison's laugh was harsh and disbelieving. "Since when do decent white men take Apache women as employees? What kind of work is she really doing here, Hartwell?" The implication in his voice made both Tom and Ayanna stiffen with anger. Tom stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "You'll watch your tongue, Sheriff, or you'll find yourself picking your teeth out of the dirt." Morrison's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but something in Tom's posture made him reconsider. "I'm just asking the questions that decent folks want answered. There's been talk about you trading weapons to the Apache, helping them plan raids, using that girl to coordinate with hostile tribes." "All lies," Tom said flatly. "Every Apache who's traded here has left satisfied and peaceful. I've never sold a single weapon to anyone, red or white. And if you knew the first thing about Ayanna, you'd know she's about as far from a hostile as anyone could be." "That's what you say, but the good people of Tucson are getting nervous about this arrangement. They think it's time someone took a closer look at what's really going on out here." Ayanna found her voice at last. "Sheriff Morrison, I have done nothing wrong. I work hard. I cause no trouble. And I harm no one. Why can I not be left in peace?" Morrison finally acknowledged her presence, but his expression remained contemptuous. "Because your kind don't belong among civilized people. Because every Apache is a potential threat to decent white families. And because some things are just naturally wrong, even if they're not exactly against the law." "My kind?" Ayanna's voice rose slightly. "What do you know about my kind? You see the color of my skin and think you know everything about who I am and what I'm capable of. But you know nothing." "I know enough," Morrison snapped. "I know your people spent decades murdering and stealing from honest settlers. I know they can't be trusted, can't be civilized, and shouldn't be allowed to live among decent folks." Tom stepped between them, his anger now barely controlled. "That's enough. You've asked your questions and gotten your answers. Time for you to leave." "I'm not done here," Morrison said, but his bluster seemed half-hearted. He had found no evidence of wrongdoing, and his accusations were beginning to sound like simple prejudice rather than legitimate law enforcement. "Yes, you are," Tom replied firmly. "This is my land, and I'm telling you to get off it. Unless you've got a warrant or some actual evidence of criminal activity, you've got no business here." Morrison looked back and forth between them, clearly frustrated by his inability to find grounds for action. Finally, he remounted his horse and gathered the reins. "This isn't over," he warned. "People are watching this place now. One mistake, one incident that can be traced back to your trading partners, and I'll be back with a federal marshal and a warrant for both your arrests." He spurred his horse into a gallop, leaving them standing in a cloud of dust and uncertain silence. "Will he cause more trouble?" Ayanna asked quietly. Tom watched the sheriff's retreating figure thoughtfully. "He'll try. But Morrison's problem is that we're not actually doing anything wrong. Trading with Apache tribes isn't illegal, and neither is employing an Apache woman. He's got prejudice and suspicion. But he doesn't have law on his side. The law has not always protected people like me." "No," Tom admitted, "it hasn't. But times are changing, slowly. And in the meantime, you've got me standing between you and anyone who wants to cause trouble." Despite his reassuring words, both of them knew that Morrison's visit represented a turning point. Their peaceful isolation had been shattered, and forces beyond their control were now paying attention to what they had built together. Over the following weeks, they noticed increased activity in the area. Strange riders appeared on distant ridges, watching the ranch for hours before disappearing. Some of their regular Apache trading partners reported being followed or questioned by white men claiming to represent various government agencies. The atmosphere of trust and cooperation that had been so carefully cultivated was being slowly poisoned by outside interference. But rather than driving them apart, the external pressure seemed to strengthen the bond between Tom and Ayanna. They worked together to develop strategies for protecting their operation and their Apache partners. Ayanna used her knowledge of desert travel to establish alternative routes and meeting places. Tom leveraged his reputation among local ranchers to build a network of allies who could vouch for the legitimacy of their activities. The crisis came to a head during the first week of autumn. A group of Apache traders had arrived to negotiate for winter supplies, bringing with them news that a raiding party from a different tribe had attacked a settlement near the Mexican border. The raiders had escaped into the mountains, but tensions were running high throughout the territory. Sheriff Morrison arrived the next morning with 2 federal marshals and a warrant to search the premises for stolen goods and weapons. They found nothing incriminating. But their very presence sent the Apache traders fleeing back into the desert, effectively ending several weeks of careful negotiation. "This has to stop," Ayanna said that evening as they surveyed the damage to their trading relationships. "My people will not return if they think they'll be harassed and arrested for dealing with us." "I know," Tom replied grimly. "Morrison's found a way to shut us down without actually charging us with anything. He just has to show up often enough to scare away our trading partners." They sat in dejected silence for a few minutes, watching the stars emerge in the desert sky. Finally, Ayanna spoke again. "Maybe it would be better if I left, went back to the reservation, or traveled south to Mexico. Without me here, they would have no reason to continue this harassment." Tom turned to look at her, his expression shocked and hurt. "You think I'd just let you leave? After everything we've built here together? You have been kind to me, Mr. Tom. Kinder than anyone has been since my family died. But I will not watch everything you have worked for be destroyed because of me." "Because of you?" Tom's voice rose with indignation. "Ayanna, you've made this ranch more successful and more profitable than it's ever been. You've brought skills and knowledge that I never could have acquired on my own. And more than that," he paused, seeming to struggle with his words, "you've brought life back to this place. Purpose and meaning that I thought I'd lost forever when Margaret and Sarah died." Ayanna felt tears gathering in her eyes. "But if they will not let us live in peace, then we'll fight," Tom said firmly. "Not with guns or violence, but with persistence and determination. We'll prove that what we're doing here is valuable and right. We'll build something too important to be torn down by narrow-minded prejudice." "How?" Tom was quiet for a moment, then his face lit up with sudden inspiration. "We expand. Instead of hiding what we're doing, we make it so public and so obviously beneficial that even Morrison can't argue against it." He began outlining his idea with growing enthusiasm. They would establish a formal trading post, licensed and registered with the territorial government. They would invite other ranchers and businessmen to participate, making the venture too large and too profitable for local authorities to shut down arbitrarily. They would document everything they did, keeping meticulous records that would prove their legitimacy to any investigator. We'll make Apache Anglo trade so normal and so profitable that people will wonder why they ever opposed it, Tom concluded. And you'll be right at the center of it all, as my partner and co-owner. Partner? Ayanna stared at him in amazement. Equal partner. You know the Apache communities, you understand both cultures, and you've got the best head for business I've ever seen. Besides, he smiled, it's about time someone challenged the idea that Apache people can't be successful entrepreneurs. As they talked through the night, planning and dreaming about what they might accomplish together, Ayanna realized that she had found something she had never dared hope for. Not just acceptance or tolerance, but genuine partnership and respect. Tom wasn't offering to protect her from the world's prejudices. He was offering to stand beside her as she proved those prejudices wrong. 6 months later, the Hartwell Trading Post was the most successful commercial venture in southern Arizona. Apache, Mexican, and Anglo traders met there regularly to exchange goods, information, and ideas. The operation employed dozens of people from all three cultures and had become a model for peaceful cooperation that drew visitors from as far away as California and Texas. Sheriff Morrison still disapproved, but he had been forced to admit that no laws were being broken and no harm was being done. The territorial governor had even visited the trading post and publicly praised it as an example of the kind of progressive thinking that would make Arizona ready for statehood. Ayanna had become something she had never imagined possible. A successful businesswoman whose Apache heritage was seen as an asset rather than a liability. She negotiated contracts, managed logistics, and had even been invited to speak at a conference on territorial development in Phoenix. But perhaps most importantly, she had found a home where she truly belonged. Not as a charity case or an exotic curiosity, but as an equal partner in building something meaningful and lasting. Standing on the porch of the big house one evening, watching Apache and Anglo children playing together near the stream while their parents conducted business in multiple languages, Ayanna reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. It had begun with a cowboy's simple act of kindness toward a desperate girl selling trinkets on a dusty street. But it had become something far greater, proof that the barriers between people could be overcome by mutual respect, shared purpose, and the courage to see beyond old prejudices to new possibilities. Tom joined her on the porch, following her gaze to the mixed group of families who had made the trading post their home. Any regrets? He asked. Ayanna smiled, thinking of the terrified, hopeless girl she had been just 2 years earlier. Only that we didn't start sooner. Well, Tom said, putting a gentle hand on her shoulder, we've got plenty of time to make up for it. As the desert stars emerged overhead, Ayanna knew he was right. They had built something beautiful and lasting in this harsh land. A place where different peoples could meet as equals, and where a discarded Apache girl could become an honored member of a new kind of family. It was more than she had ever dared dream, and it was only the beginning.